Rip Van Winkle, recording number 2. Whoever has made a voyage up the Hudson must remember the Catskill Mountains. They are a dismembered branch of the great Appalachian family and are seen away to the west of the river, swelling up to a noble height and lording it over the surrounding country. Every change of season, every change of weather, indeed, every hour of the day produces some change in the magical hues and shapes of these mountains, and they are regarded by all the good wives, far and near, as perfect barometers. When the weather is fair and settled, they are clothed in blue and purple, and print their bold outlines on the clear evening sky. But sometimes, when the rest of the landscape is cloudless, they will gather a hood of gray vapors about their summits, which, in the last rays of the setting sun, will glow and light up like a crown of glory. One of the things that you may want to do as you're starting this second part of Rip Van Winkle is to take a look at some of the vocabulary terms with which you may not be familiar. I've put a list on the portal from both the first and second sections, and here's list number 2. There are a number of words that, as you're reading through these 3 paragraphs, section 2 is only 3 paragraphs in length, but there are a number of words with which you may lack familiarity. And if you do, it's important to spend the time going to your search engine or to Quizlet and finding out what these words mean. That will help you understand the reading. So we go back to Rip Van Winkle. Now, in this paragraph, the first paragraph of section 2 of the story, Washington Irving is painting a picture for us. Now, remember, these stories were written in the early 19th century, prior to the advent of photography. And so authors, literally, their job, more than figuratively, but quite literally, was to paint through the use of words a picture so that people could take a look at the words that are being written and actually have a visual image. And in this case, we get a bunch of images through both metaphor and description that are really great. First of all is this idea that the Catskills are not part of the Appalachian chain, but are sort of off to the west, are a dismembered, literally cut off from the Appalachians. And if I were to take this word Appalachian for the Appalachian Mountains, and I were to plug it into my search engine and come up with the Appalachian Mountains, I would get a sense for not only where the Appalachians are, what they look like, where they range from Georgia all the way up to Maine, and I could probably say Appalachian Mountains compared to Catskills. And there, let's see what happens here. If I do that search, the Appalachians compared to the Catskills. And I might get, here's compare and contrast the Appalachians with the Catskill Mountains. And in this particular web portal, maybe there's some information, but there isn't. Anyway, you get the picture. Oh, I'm using these right now, by the way. I have these Bose earphones. They're awesome. So you can get a sense by using search engines to find out, so okay, where are the Catskills? Where are the Appalachian Mountains? How far to the west of the Appalachian Range do we find the Catskills? And that can help with your own sense for the story. They are a dismembered branch of the great Appalachian family, and they are seen away to the west of the river. In this case, this is the Hudson River, swelling up to a noble height and lording it over the surrounding country. So the mountains swell up, and this idea of nobility, a noble height, something that is almost like royalty, and lording it over the surrounding country, as if they are the kings and queens of the countryside. Every change in season, every change in the weather, indeed every hour of the day produces some magical hues and shapes of these mountains. So, based upon the angle of the sun, based upon whether it's foggy or rainy, the mountains bring life to the area. And they are regarded by all the good wives as perfect barometers. Now, we know barometers literally measure the pressure, air pressure. The barometric pressure is the pressure of the air, and as the pressure in the air falls in meteorological terms, that's when we tend to get weather, precipitation. As pressures rise, we tend to get fair weather or sun. But this is also a moment of foreshadowing, because in the story, Washington Irving paints a picture for us of Rip Van Winkle's wife that is not altogether a happy picture. And so we get a sense here in the very beginning of the story that part of the barometer with regard to that Irving is referring to is how wives not only measure the weather, but how they measure the works of their husbands. Excuse me. Cup of coffee. How they measure the works of their husbands. Are their husbands doing what they should be doing around the house, etc.? So it's foreshadowing things that are going to come later in the story. When the weather is fair and settled, and they are clothed in blue and purple, so that when the mountains are draped in clothing of blue and purple, a metaphor, of course, and print their bold outlines on the clear evening sky, etc. But when the rest of the landscape is cloudless, they will gather hoods of gray vapors about their summits, right? Sometimes it'll be a beautiful sunny day, but at the top of mountains, because of something called the orographic effect, you get winds that, as they rise up the mountains on a clear day, can cause clouds at the top of a mountain. And of course, you know, you've seen, be heard, your opinion matters, opinion central, no, I'll pass. You've heard about, like, for instance, you know, clouds at the top of Everest, right? You know, maybe at the top of Mount Everest. So for instance, this is the picture that's being painted with regard to the Catskills, right? There's a picture of Mount Everest. It's a beautiful day, but because of winds going up the side of the mountain, it causes condensation and it causes clouds to form. That's the picture that's being painted here. So in the first paragraph of part 2, Washington Irving is giving us a picture of the Catskill Mountains. In the second paragraph of part 2 of this particular book of Rip Van Winkle, sorry, I lost my train of thought, we get a picture painted of the town in which Rip Van Winkle lives. And then in the final paragraph, we get a picture of Rip Van Winkle himself. So the 3 paragraphs serve as an introduction to the area, an introduction to the village itself, and then an introduction to Rip himself. At the foot of these fairy mountains, and in this case fairy means like magical, mystical mountains, the voyager may have descried. Now, here's a word that looks like described, but I'm not familiar with descried as a term that is popular in the contemporary English language. So I might copy that and go over here to Google and type this in, describe, and see what I come up with. And I might get a definition of what this word means. Now, that might not be enough for me. I might want to know more about the etymology. Like, here's an etymological description, where the word comes from. So to descry is to catch sight of something. Interesting. And it's a word that, to be honest with you, I was not familiar with until I read the story and then went through and looked on Google to get a definition from dictionary.com. Whose shingled roofs gleam among the trees, just where the blue tints of the upland melt away into the fresh green of the nearer landscape. It is a little village of great antiquity, of great age, having been founded by some of the Dutch colonists, people from Holland who moved to the New World to farm and to exploit the land and to live freely in the early times of the province, just about the beginning of the government of good Peter Stuyvesant, may he rest in peace. And there were some of the houses of the original settlers standing within a few years, built of small yellow bricks brought from Holland, having latticed windows and gable fronts surmounted with weathercocks. Now, we move on to the last paragraph, and so we've had 2 pictures painted. Now we're going to have a 3rd picture painted. Now we're going to hear about Rip himself. In that same village, and in one of these very houses, which, to tell the precise truth, was sadly time-worn and weather-beaten, there lived many years since, while the good country was yet a province of Great Britain, a simple, good-natured fellow of the name Rip Van Winkle. He was a descendant of the Van Winkles who figured so gallantly in the chivalrous days of Peter Stuyvesant and accompanied him to the siege of Fort Christina. Now, it's interesting, this should give you a sense, while the country was yet at a province of Great Britain, as to when this is taking place, right? Early, mid to late 18th century, mid to late 1700s, prior to the American Revolution. The story takes place in this period of time prior to the Revolution and at the Revolution. So Rip Van Winkle, quote unquote, falls asleep prior to the Revolution and wanders back to the village during the Revolution. He inherited, however, but little of the martial character of his ancestors. I have observed that he was a simple, good-natured man. He was, moreover, a kind neighbor and an obedient, henpecked husband. Indeed, to the latter circumstance, so the latter meaning the husband part as opposed to the neighbor part, if it was the former, that would be the neighbor, to the latter circumstance might be owing that meekness of spirit which gained him such universal popularity. That's an interesting way of saying he was quiet and he was polite because he was afraid, and so people liked him because he didn't rub them the wrong way. For those men are most apt to be obsequious and conciliating abroad who are under the disciplines of shrews at home. Again, now we're starting to hear about his wife, this idea of the termagant wife, the shrew. Their tempers, doubtless, are rendered pliant and malleable in the fiery furnace of domestic tribulation. Now, there's a sentence that you're really going to need to take a look at, some vocabulary. If I were to translate it for you, I'd say, their tempers, doubtless, are rendered easily molded because of all of the difficulties that they have at home. And a certain lecture is worth all the sermons in the world for teaching the virtues of patience and long-suffering. A termagant wife may, therefore, in some respects, be considered a tolerable blessing, and if so, Rip Van Winkle was thrice blessed, which is a little form of comedy on the part of Washington Irving. Okay, end of part 2.